There's just so many thoughts. I think we talk about authenticity of like cultivating authenticity. We need to be ourselves. Like it's an easy thing,
Yeah.
right? It was interesting. I don't know. We haven't talked about it yet. I mean, this is only the second week. But that word cultivating, it's an interesting word, isn't it? It's like preparing. It's like preparing, turning the soil, beginning to explore, beginning to
Mm,
uh, uh, um, put the things in that need to be there in order for something to grow, right? And so it's not like boom, authenticity. We're here. We are. We're authentic. No, it's cultivating. It's like this.
yeah. Mm,
Beginning to take a look, and I think like taking a look at the masks, taking a look at how we show up, taking a look why we're showing up that way. All those things. That's the cultivating. That's the
yeah.
preparing the
Yeah.
soil, kind of getting in it, and then being like, okay, I understand a little bit about the why or the kind of the past narratives, and now I can begin to plant this new seed of authenticity, and that it's not static, right?
Yeah.
Like, boom, I'm authentic, we're done. No, it's like this ever growing
Mm,
thing. We'll never be, right?
yeah.
Truly authentic because we're always changing. We're always exploring what that means. But I like that cultivating thing is what gets me in my brain.
I don't think I've thought of it this way before, but it creates this space where we don't have to know immediately what our authentic self is.
Yeah.
And that then becomes authentic. Like the
Yes.
not knowing, the cultivating, the creating, right. That's different than like, I think I've thought of it in the past as I know what my authentic self is, and I don't feel like I can be that here. So I'm going to wear this
Mhm.
mask, or I'm going
Yeah.
to do this thing to fit in, or whatever. But that is a really different perspective to take on. Like, maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
There's room for authenticity evolving. Like I can change and grow, and that's
Right.
kind of a cool.
Well,
Hmm.
and then the thing becomes the thing. So the thing in exploring and looking and
Yeah,
whatever, becomes the authenticity.
yeah,
And then it's like it kind of is like a let's brain circle. Like the thing is a thing, and then by exploring the thing, we live more of the thing
yeah,
being authenticity. By
yeah,
exploring what that is, we live more of what it is, right?
yeah,
I think inauthentic, and when we talk about mask, is what I think a mask is a static thing. It does not
yeah.
change, it stays. I mean, if you think about a physical mask, like a Halloween
Sure.
mask,
Yeah.
it stays, it doesn't change, right? But that's not who we are.
I really resonated when you were talking in your segment about like feeling when things are not authentic.
Mm.
I was like, oh yeah, like that's and now, but also I'm wondering like maybe I don't always. Maybe I only recognize those specific moments where there is a specific feeling that feels inauthentic. But
Yeah.
maybe if I don't, maybe there are parts of me that I'm not aware of what is authentic or feels authentic, or like the part of me that is being authentic by recognizing I don't know was, I don't know, that just kind of I wonder though how much of the population is familiar enough to know when something doesn't feel authentic. Like I don't know that I always felt that as strongly as I do now. I think some of that is learned by the process of becoming familiar with one's self, to even recognize. I think in the past I've just like, oh, that person's such a jerk. Right? Like the discomfort gets passed
Yeah.
off on somebody else's behavior or something, right? And rather than, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable because
Mm,
I'm not embracing my authenticity right
yeah.
now. It's an interesting point to realize is like I don't necessarily always recognize that feeling, even though there are times where I do recognize that feeling, and I can, as soon as you said it, like I recognize it right away. I can go to like oh, I can go and feel that feeling right now, like I'm familiar with that. And yet there are probably other places where I'm not as familiar with the feeling because it has been associated with some other something else, some other
Mhm.
experience or some other thought, or it's it's that blame passing off of somebody else, like they're just being a jerk or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I know. I feel like we should offer something at this point to be like, so this is how you.
Well, and that's interesting that when you give that kind of differentiation, because there's sometimes I don't realize it too, because it's so ingrained in a past story or past presentation of how I've shown up.
Yeah.
It just becomes natural, right? What I'm learning now, like more and more as, we're in conversations like this and actually trying to move from actually just having the conversations, which is always super fun, but then actually applying them, which is the challenging part. The more now I'm realizing the effects of inauthenticity for myself.
Yeah.
So for me, it feels heavy in my body. Oftentimes it feels like I can't catch my breath. It has this just a weird, like visceral feeling in my body. And so when I'm having that, and
It's also exhausting.
well, it's very exhausting. And so when I'm having that, going back to last month's theme, then I ask it like, oh, ooh, why am I feeling that way? And then it'll take me back to maybe there was an interaction, or maybe I'm showing up in a way of like, ooh, why have I shown up that way? That's not really true to me. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's the way I have been expected to show up in the past. Or maybe I've fallen into, well, I want to be liked. I want to be accepted. I want people to think we're cool. I mean, like that sort
We
of
are.
thing. And then it kind of creates this kind of, you want to like meld into whatever cool is. And so for me, and then I'm like, oh, that's what it is. And so I may not like catch it right in the moment, or even before, which is like we're working to like recognize when it comes up and then change it before we actually engage in that sort of behavior. But I think I'm at the stage now where I'm recognizing the effects on my body and mind and spirit, which I think is a precursor to that. Catching it before you go into it.
Yeah.
What's interesting too is when I'm in situations and spaces, and friendships, friends like you and I, like I can show up authentically, and oh, I know what that feels like now. But then when I show up in another relationship or another interaction, and I don't have that same feeling, now I have a really cool gauge of this is my authenticity gauge, because I know what it feels like. And so then it creates, oh, okay, what am I needing to let go of, or what am I needing to shift in order to get into that sweet spot of authenticity?
I share in that a lot. It's like, oh yeah, having the place where it's like, okay, that's, oh, I know that to be, let's say, real. Like that's real now. Like that is a blueprint, or that gauge, that thing to go back and check by. What's interesting to me then is other places where in the past that I have thought were places that were supposed to be like safe places, or places that vulnerability was encouraged and it was taught, told to be a safe place. And like I think I believed in it, like that it was, those places were, and it's like, oh yeah, maybe not so much. Like I think, even within a spiritual setting, just because we're in a spiritual teaching, because we're practicing spirituality or on a spiritual path, doesn't mean we are like immediately free from mask wearing and the, we're not automatically safe places, right? Like we still have to do the work, and we still have to be observant of the masks. And if we want to be a safe place, we have to practice things that are things that create safe spaces. And if we want to encourage vulnerability, we have to allow for vulnerability and be vulnerable. And I think that's like that next level mask wearing is like in those places where we're like, yeah, this is a place where vulnerability is okay, except, often, except when checklist, but yeah, no, seriously, to have seen like, oh, this is a safe place where it's okay to be vulnerable, except that when people show up with their vulnerabilities, it makes us uncomfortable, because we still like that codependency mask wearing. We're like, ooh, that's too uncomfortable. Like, yeah, this is a place for vulnerability as long as it's like within this box, and it's like, oh yeah,
Which
that's
becomes
where,
its own mask. And I'm going to say something controversial. Maybe not. I think spirituality become a mask too, right? If we're using spirituality to avoid, or to be like, well, I'm spiritual, look at me. But meanwhile, like
here's my spiritual mask.
there are things are, yeah. So, I think that we can use that spiritual mask. And I think that happens often when we show up in spiritual communities, and we've got to show up with our shit together, right? We feel like we have to, and that may be our own doing, or it may be a response to something that we are feeling externally from a community, for a group of people. It can go either way, but like, it can be used as a mask too. We have to be careful not to drop one and pick up another, right? And if we do, it's an opportunity to be like, that's some really good information about what I just did, and now I can learn from that and move on.
And I think that's the difference between looking at how we wear masks because of how someone else might see us, versus why we wear a mask so that we don't see ourselves, right? Like I think that's, I don't know, is that the growth edge of authenticity? I don't know, or is that my growth edge of authenticity?
It all feels like the green growing edge.
Yeah, right. Like, any conversation about authenticity, the ones that I have heard tend to focus on the masks we wear to fit in, the masks that we've learned to wear, that life has taught us to wear, so that such and such a result, which true, like, that's all well and good, and we do need to look at that. I don't know how much I've heard about the masks that we wear for ourselves. And I think that's, that is kind of all what we're talking about here, is like, well, if we take the time to look at what masks are we wearing for ourselves, because we try and trick ourselves. And I think after wearing a certain mask for so long and believing in such an identity, like, oh, I wear this mask as dad. And that means a lot. And I believe that's who I am and what I am. What am I if I'm not? Right. And I'm not that I ever wouldn't be, but is that who I'm defining myself as? And what would it mean to not wear only that mask? And I don't know that I do. I mean, I think I do wear other masks as well.
It's interesting too. Authenticity. I don't think authenticity is unique to each individual. So, we could talk about authenticity a lot, and it's kind of like the wave in spiritual communities. It's a wave, I think, in general, this conversation, and because then it becomes like this buzzword that then means nothing. And so I think that we get the opportunity to define what it means for us, right? Because I think it does show up differently for different people based on lots of things. And I am not going to determine what your authenticity looks like, or my, it's like, it's one of those things that is deeply personal and individual, yet it gets broadcast out, right? And so it's this really interesting relationship. And I think we get to choose what that looks like for us. And I think it's more than a buzzword. I think it is like, we're always moving, always trying to find ways to express ourselves in ways that feel good and affirming to us, right? And so authenticity just seems like that, just the activity of life. It's not like perfection. It's not like this one and done thing. It's just like this movement.
You heard it here first, folks, that authenticity is more than a buzzword.
More than a buzzword. So thank you for participating in this conversation of authenticity. You can tell that there's so many layers of this conversation around mask, and how we drop mask, and how we began to show up as our authentic self. And one of the really fun ways we do that is through relationship with one another. And so there's so many opportunities here at Soul Evolution Collaborative for you to actually do that, to actually practice being your authentic self. And what better place to practice than with people that are affirming, and people that want to see you, and people want to be seen. If you'd like to explore this conversation further, well, a great opportunity to practice authenticity is at our weekly gathering. That is on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can go to our website and find more information about that, and how to sign up, and how to get the link for that. Check out our YouTube page. It is full of authentic conversations and a lot of evergreen videos, and more to come. about this exploration of authenticity, exploration of cultivating authenticity, and just this exploration of life and what it means. And so, if we don't see you on Thursday, we hope to see you back here on Tuesday for another episode of Truth Be Told.